Hey, Julie and Heather at Women Leaders in Law Enforcement in California, they had shirts, socks, fanny packs. Come on.
Wait, I can top that. Guy stopped me on the street, literally lifted up his shirt, showed me his back, tramp stamp of the hollow bunny of our faces. Crazy, right?
Okay, so Ted, can you top that?
God.
I just
A
like to
dude with a
lead you.
tramp stamp. You had me at that.
I just like to lead you down a lower back path.
The Hollow Buddy. And we all feel hollow sometimes.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the Hollow Bunny Leadership Podcast. I'm Kristen Zeman, and I'm here with my sparkly co-host.
Sparkly.
Yeah, I always
love
try to
that.
decide what you are, and today I think you're sparkly. I think it's the paisley. It's really highlighting your sparkly features. So,
Okay.
yeah, you're sparkly today, Sil. Okay.
Hey, any solid bunny will take sparkly. Any day.
Absolutely.
And I know you love confetti, which is a close kissing cousin to sparkly. So, hey, bring it on, Kristen Zeman.
Is it? Is it? Did you just make that up?
I did just now.
Is it like a third cousin?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
close.
I'm going to let you have that.
Thank you.
Sylvia Moyer, the Hollow Bunny podcast is not just for cops. We have a lot of bunnies who are listening, who are in law enforcement and some in other organizations. But as you know, as our listeners know, the Hollow Bunny is the metaphor that we talk about of arrogance mixed with incompetence. And that is the Hollow Bunny, kind of like an empty suit. So today we are going to talk about just a whole plethora of things, right? Things that fill bunnies and deplete bunnies, right?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some topics that are possibly crunchy, but no doubt, Kristen, we are going to discuss some things that leaders can really chew on and perhaps take some action based on their thinking, maybe some suggestions, some things that they can do today. And no doubt they'll be nudged into thinking about some of these bigger topics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's get into the crunchy.
Okay, so I want to know all about this conference in which you spoke. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because you consistently add value wherever you speak. And you're not just speaking to speak, you're speaking to nudge, you're speaking to transform, you're speaking to prepare and get folks to think about the unthinkable. And so a whole bunch of folks came back and told me that they were super stoked to sit in on your talk in Las Vegas recently. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was there for the Axon TaserCon conference, and the very name sounds a little ominous, right? Taser.
Did you wear camouflage?
There were a lot of BDUs, a lot of 511s there, so for
Got
sure. But so the conference was put on by Axon. And so, I'm really in alignment with Axon's goals. They have a moonshot goal in the US to cut police involved deaths with police and the public by 50% before 2033. And that's a giant undertaking. And the way they're doing that is by using technology. So tasers are less lethal. We've heard of tasers. And so they're another option that officers have on their tool belt. So this conference was really surrounding the technology that can be used instead of firearms and less lethal. So I was speaking there. I spoke on a couple panels, one being resilience and mental health and wellness,
Of course.
and then on recruitment and retention. And then I gave my solo presentation on preparing for the unthinkable, which I do for law enforcement. And so this brought back for me all of the things that we have talked about. This has never happened in one of my audiences before. I was presenting and I noticed some commotion in the back. Okay. And I got done. I really didn't think much of it. I thought maybe people were just chatting, and the room was pretty full. And afterwards, I saw this huddle happening around this gentleman. And so I grabbed my belongings and I waited and I talked with some of the people who were engaging this man, and they're former law enforcement, and they are now mental health and wellness experts for first responders from
Yeah.
Athena Health. And so they shared with me that during my presentation, this man had a reaction, a very emotional and physical reaction to my going through the shooting that happened in my city. So apparently this man, former law enforcement, had been through a shooting himself. So
Wow.
they noticed that he was having a physical reaction, and they went to him immediately and asked him what was wrong. And so here's what happened. They shared with me the following day, after they spoke with him, he wrote them a note and slipped it to them. And it said in the note, thank you for intervening. I might have done something to myself had you not have intervened. And
Wow.
man, that's heavy, right? And first of all, and I felt so responsible, and they assured me that, this is just the topic. But you and I have talked about this so much, about
Yes,
the
we have.
power of having people to say, are you okay? And when they say, I'm fine, to ask them again. And so this man, these individuals saw, and they swooped in and they helped him. And that's just pretty heavy.
That's a big deal. Not only how profoundly moving for you, but the fact that folks recognize the signs and
Yeah.
actually took the courageous step to connect with him and figure out what's going on and support him through that. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And then, so that's a big, big deal. And I don't want that to be overshadowed, but I do want to know you as my sister, my colleague, my friend, my just inspiration, right? How does that affect you and your messaging moving forward? What do you do with that? Do
Yeah.
you do anything differently?
Well, it did. It bothered me. It bothered me a lot, and especially when you talk about the law enforcement audience. We are typically, well, as then this is part of the problem, right? As I was going to say, we are typically more resilient to these sort of topics because this
Yeah.
is what we deal with. And so it really underscores the fact that, especially people who have been through something traumatic, and that
Yeah.
anything can trigger it. And so again, I felt so guilty, but they assured me that, this was him, and, reacting in his personal way. And I asked them, is there something I should change
Hmm.
in my presentation? And they assured me that there wasn't, but it just was worth mentioning, because we have to make sure that when we see that happening with one of our comrades, that we ask them, are you okay? And it got me thinking. I was just sitting with my neighbor just last night, and he came over. We were sitting on the lanai. That's a fancy word for patio in Florida. And he said, you know what? I was just curious. Someone asked me the other day, when you're standing on a bridge and you're about ready to jump, either, I don't know, literally or figuratively, who do you call? And you can't pick, your spouse or your significant other. Who do you have? Do you have someone on speed dial? And so I'm not asking that question, right now. I'm just kind of putting it out there for everyone, because I thought about it and the names started filtering through. And you know what? The first thing I thought of was, I have names, but I don't think I would want to bother anyone. And that's something that I need to
Mm.
check within myself, because that it made me go, gosh, I think instead of calling, I would be like, oh, I don't want to be a burden on anyone, and so it really made me realize I probably need to go find a therapist. But I loved the question because it made me think.
Can I
Right.
jump in
No
with a
doubt.
question?
Ted.
Because the
Yeah.
the person who had the reaction is a former officer. Who were the people who
Yeah.
intervened? Also, former officers who might be trained to do so, or civilians?
Yeah, former officers,
Okay.
and Michelle Freeman, one of our full bunnies,
What?
our solid bunnies, is part of this health system, and that's the work that
Wow.
she's been doing post law enforcement. And so her team of people were the ones who swooped in. So that is a lesson for all of us because we don't
Yeah.
have to be professionals. And I want to just make sure that we throw that out there is that, of course, when you go into, the deeper kinds of therapy, but I'm talking about just the everyday, hey, are you okay? I've noticed
Yeah.
that you're not yourself or, you're reacting differently. And so it's just that question, I think, that is so important in helping someone and getting them the help they need.
Kristen, I want to tug on that thread, and at the risk of speaking autobiographically, and this is in no way comparing experiences, but it's talking about the courage to step in and say something when you notice, the courage to do something uncomfortable. We seem to be really talking about this a lot lately, and I want to tell you this story. I was 13 when my dad died. He had been sick for a while. It was summertime, so school was out in our small little town of Davis, California, fantastic university town. And I remember a few days after he died, a dear friend of mine who I'd been friends with and hung out with a lot. I saw her at the grocery store. And when you're walking the grocery store, you have the front where the cashiers are and the back, and you've got all those aisles. Well, I saw her. I was at the front. She was toward the back. I saw her down the aisle. I waved at her. She waved at me, and then she walked off. I thought, what? So I walked back to find her. I didn't find her. I called her later. I don't recall if it was a day or two later, but I said, hey, Judy, I saw you. That was her name. I saw you at the grocery store. And where did you go? Where have you been? What happened? And she said, hey, Syl, I know your dad died, and I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've told this story a couple times, and I think that story comes up for me all the time when I'm thinking about how we have courageous conversations, how we lean into what's uncomfortable for us to just be present for others. And so what you just did, I mean, there's a whole lot to unpack in your story here. You're making a difference. You're showing the actual body-worn camera footage and surveillance footage and unpacking this hugely significant and traumatic event where people lost their lives and cops were shot. And you're doing this to impact folks to actually recognize and to make a difference. And there was a byproduct of trauma for this one person, and people saw it and they intervened and they were courageous. That's a lot. So,
Yeah.
so we don't stop talking about it. It sounds like, we continue talking about it. So it really encourages us to do what's uncomfortable, to do something. And bravo to this guy that had the moment of this coming back up for him with his post-traumatic stress injury and actually receiving the help of people leaning into him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because of course, he didn't have to do that. He could have resisted, but instead he leaned into it. And I think that's what you're even saying about, what happened to you is this friend wanted to be there for you, but it's awkward. She doesn't know what to say. You're afraid you're going to say the wrong thing. And, what we've come to understand is that, we don't need anyone to say the right thing. We just need people to sit with us in silence and suffering, just to be right there with us. Yeah, just show up for other people.
We talk about it a lot. So this is a tough time, across the nation with police and the crosshairs again. And those of us in the biz and recently exited the biz, really understanding what we saw and trying to make sense of all. We could argue that policing has improved so much. And so much of what we do is improved in terms of tactics and tools and interaction and transparency and data collection and discernment and crime analysis. And the way that we police has really improved. And then we see things that are completely void of humanity. And
absolutely.
We think, and people are asking, and you were on CNN recently and really tapped on the shoulder to answer these questions as a former executive. What do you do about something as heinous as we saw in Memphis and the loss of life and the loss of trust? What are you thinking around this? What's coming up for you?
Yeah, it's the same, quote that always comes to mind when something like this happens, and I'm going to mess up the quote, but I have seen the enemy and he is us, right? And
Mhm.
this is another time that law enforcement, tarnished all of our badges. And the question that keeps coming up for people is, how could this happen? And
Yeah.
people are putting it onto this specialized unit. And I don't know if you've had the conversations with people about this quote scorpion unit. And it's interesting that the scorpion unit is an acronym. You know how we love our acronyms in law
Yes, we
enforcement and the
do.
military. And the scorpion unit is street crime operation to restore peace in our neighborhoods. And that just sounds so beautiful. And then they disband the unit and call it, all of these TAC units are bad. And I'm pushing back on that to say, gosh, and I'm sure where you are, you've got specialized units that, truly drill down on in as far as intelligence-led policing and data-driven policing to prolific offenders, those offenders that are wreaking
Yes.
havoc on communities. So these units are good when they operate with oversight, when they operate with leadership, when they operate with, I will say, a culture of
Yes.
accountability, because that word culture
And
keeps getting thrown around.
yeah, and they're operating in a space that they are inserted to safeguard people, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
here's this thing, I really want to tug at this. Outputs and outcomes. So many of them are judged based on outputs. How many arrests, how many guns, what kind of weight of drugs, what kind of these are numbers. What are the
Yep.
outcomes? What conversations are we having with specialized units about
Mhm.
outcomes?
Yeah, right. And an outcome may be, and this is where I don't want people to misunderstand, is that law enforcement, the very nature of the phrase, is to enforce the law. And that's not sexy, And so there will be times when there is an arrest, a probable cause arrest, where a person is going to resist, not go peacefully. But the outcome, the best outcome, is those officers apply only the amount of force to take that individual into custody. And
Yeah.
once that occurs, that action ceases and de-escalation begins. And we didn't see that in that moment. And I don't know about you, but I keep being asked is, what do you think was happening? First of all, they were wearing body cams, which tells me that they are pretty, that's a pretty routine thing for them to do, to have committed this act, all of them. And they know that they're being videotaped. So there's that aspect of it. But is it that man versus moment where that adrenaline is so high? And you can speak to the science behind this far better than I can. But it's almost looked like they enjoyed their feeling of power and free floating cruelty. And was it because they were mad that Tyree Nichols ran away? What is your thoughts behind the behaviors from that fateful day?
Wow. That's a big question. I think there are a number of things. Folks are speaking to training. And so training is skill building. I also think it has to be education, which is development. I really advocate for us doing that kind of non traditional training that consistently inserts humanity, that trains the actual operator, the police officer who's caught up in the actual neuroscience is informing that when your amygdala gets hijacked, it's that part of our brain, it's that part of us that when it is hijacked, it is overcome. And one's ability to reason is we are overtaken. And so to conduct training and education on those kinds of skills, behaviors, practices that would get the individual to think more clearly, it goes right back, gosh, so much of what we talk about goes right back to meditation,
Mhm.
mindfulness, resilience. The pathways are clear. The evidence is showing that we can train individuals, human beings, in heightened states of anxiety, of
Yeah.
fear, of all the things that drive us to fight, flight, freeze, right? We can train to be more clear in those moments. I think there are a number of things. Culture, climate perhaps in the unit should be evaluated, the training in terms of defensive tactics, and somehow we've got to insert some kind of training and education related to humanity, one's ability to stop when they are heightened.
Yeah.
And then, come on, just the rendering aid.
Yeah.
Rendering aid, and actually, this is kind of my book. Give a shit. Give a shit about another human being. And I didn't see much evidence of anyone giving a shit about this young man. I didn't see them giving a shit about the profession of policing, the absence of trust, and the loss of life. So,
Yeah. You know what? So here's what I think, because people say, how do we fix this? Well, if I had the answer, I would bottle it up and, and make it a magic potion and hand it out. But one of them is leadership. And, I have this, this kind of paradoxical idea about leadership because, as we know, first of all, CJ Davis is a great leader. For everything that I've known about her in our law enforcement profession, she's been there only a year and a half. And as we know, it takes 7 years to change a culture.
Sure.
But I will say this. So this is not, anything indicative of her leadership. However, and I'm saying that, however, is that what leaders have to tout the noble mission, and they have to literally scream it from the rooftops. It has to be a drum that is constantly just beaten throughout the agency, is that here are our values, here are our attributes, and we will enforce the law, but we will do so in a way that treats people with human dignity and respect, even those people who break the law. So I think there's that layer. Then you mentioned training, and people have pushed back on me when I say that there was a lack of training. Their response to me is, oh, that's what the defendants are going to say, is they weren't trained properly. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying the best gift that you can give your officers is to invest in their skills and their tools. And those skills are, there are 5 cops that night that were trying to subdue a 144-pound man, and none of them could do it. And that tells me that their skill level was very low in their training. And so when you actually, and this is why people, are, well, hold on, you're going to train, defensive tactics. And then this is where I mentioned earlier, the taser comes in, less lethal, using tools. And as we know, a firearm wasn't utilized here, but, the man was beaten to death. But you have, so that level of training where you teach officers, how to use defensive tactics with communication. You take the left arm, I'll take the right arm, and you get them cuffed up, and then you stop and de-escalate. And then here is the most important part. And this is why sometimes I say that leadership is more often about followership, is that is where a movement begins. And it is our peer officers that are truly going to change the culture.
Yep.
And when I say culture, I'm very, very specific, a culture of accountability, where if you and I are so hyped up on emotion, and as you mentioned, my amygdala is all out of control or whatever that is, and you recognize that I am having a moment of emotion and anger, then you, as my peer, you grab me and you say, I'll take it from here, sister. And I have seen
I've been there.
Cops do that. Yep. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen cops say, you know what, buddy, I'm going to grab you out of here. I'll take it from here. And that is where we are going to have the culture of accountability, but it's going to take peers and all of those layers together. And that's my hypothesis.
Yeah. And I got to say, I mean, even as a police chief, when we had a fatal shooting of a 14-year-old, and the community came out and enraged, and we were in the council chambers and people screaming and yelling for hours and hours and hours. I had an assistant chief. I was tapped out. He grabbed me. I said, I'm right here. I was overcome by this need to stay in it. And he tapped me and he said, Chief, gotta go.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm not going to go. And he said, let's breathe and go.
And think about that. That's even speaking truth to power. You outranked.
Hell. I said, right?
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah. And I think I've seen it in the field. I've seen it in a number of different arenas. And so that is creating a culture and a climate. Culture takes a long time to change. Climate is more the way we speak, the way we interact, the language we use. It's more rapid to change, I would argue. But you even said it, culture eats policy for lunch, right? We can have all the policies.
I said breakfast, but you can have lunch if you want. That's fine.
Okay, for
it's
a meal.
Brunch.
Yes.
Okay. You know what? So we speak on behalf of police officer bunnies. Ted, you represent, the other bunnies. What do you got?
Well, as you've both been police chiefs and in leadership positions, and Sylvia was talking about training and improving the training of officers in general, should this video be edited and shown to every officer in training? Should these types of videos be shown? If you were in position of that to do that now, would you show your officers this video?
100%. I would, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that it's not enough just to have the anecdotal "thou shalt not commit excessive force." How powerful is that for me to say those words and to, permeate that through the organization without showing them, much of life and what we learn is what not to do. And I am perfectly fine with making examples out of people and saying this is who we don't want to be. These
Right.
people. Yeah.
And have the conversation about it. And I could say that every one of us can argue in policing. We can say objectively, policing is way better than it used to be. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of officers that do the right thing repeatedly. There are thousands, tens of thousands that, given a similar situation, would intervene. The duty to intercede is not just a duty by policy. It's part of who we are. And they demonstrate it repeatedly. And this gets us a step back. Ted, I want to put this in your arena. I was watching a football game this past weekend, and there was a shoving match, right? In the same way, you have an aggressor, you have someone responding, and then you've got other guys clearing the bench, and you've got these reasoned people pulling people back saying, dude, don't get thrown out of the game. We're going to go to the Super Bowl. Don't get thrown out of the game because you're going to do something stupid. In essence, what I'm thinking they're saying, how is it any different in policing except for the consequence and the public trust that we're given? Policing, and I want you to answer that in a second. Policing is a unique profession with unique coping mechanisms. We have government authority to use deadly force and government authority to deprive people of their freedom. That is a big deal that cannot be taken lightly. And so we have duties to intervene, and cops do it all the time when someone is just beyond their capacity to chill out. So totally different in terms of consequence and loss of life. But speak to that, Ted. You've seen it on the ball field, right? Various ball fields where you've been a big shot.
Well, sure. In football,
I was going to say baller.
I was going to say baller, but I didn't know if we were allowed to say baller because it's a serious
really?
topic.
You're questioning whether you should say a word? You're the
Okay.
reason this is explicit.
You're right. I'm trying to be more impeccable with my word, Kristen.
Carry on, Ted.
well, in football, these guys, they're basically trained and encouraged to go 100 miles an hour and then stop.
Yeah.
Right? The last play in that
Okay.
Bengals 49ers game, the AFC, or not Bengals, the Bengals Chiefs game, when that linebacker shoved Patrick Mahomes
Number 58.
1 yard or 2 yards too late, 15 yards, and that was the difference of the game. And he had the game of his life, played great. And it's just hard to both play at 100% aggressiveness and then just immediately turn it off at the right time so you don't cross the line. And I'm sure policing is the same way. And kind of my question, you talk about that pushing and the shoving, and you're talking about what happened in Memphis. You could probably speak to this, is, mob mentality is a real thing, right?
Yes.
Why does it affect a lot of people, but it doesn't affect everyone? Because there are just always people who know that, whoa, this is getting out of hand. And there are some people who cannot help but get caught up in it. And I think that's what happened in Memphis.
This is where Sil mentioned earlier, where you have to stop, pause, whatever that looks like for you, the rescue breathing, whatever that pause looks like, that moment between stimulus and response is where our greatest freedom lays. And so it is in those moments where you stop, remove yourself from the situation. And then the first part. And
Yeah.
then the second part is to be the disruptor, the courageous disruptor that says, hey, you know what? You are out of line and I'm going to take it from here. So that's a heavy ask, and especially when people are hyped up, and that's the science behind it. That's not an excuse for these kinds of behaviors. I'm just trying to understand, but then you have a whole other element, to Memphis where, these guys were laughing after the fact and saying that was fun, all caught on body cam. And so, and then you saw them trying to justify their
Painful.
actions. Yeah, it was just on
Painful. And
another
dude
level.
tying his shoe.
Yeah. On another
Oh,
level. Yeah. And so
man.
how do we fix this? But it has to be, first of all, to recognize that this is not the best of us. This is not the majority of us. And yet that still is a difficult thing to say to the nation, who keeps seeing the same kinds of headlines and the same outcomes. And when cops make mistakes, to your point, it's different than in sports, is that these outcomes can be deadly. A heart no longer beats. And so we can't make these kinds of mistakes anymore. And we have to figure out in our organizations how to provide the leadership that our people need, and first line leadership. That is the most important. We've always said sergeants are truly the strongest line of leadership with our officers. And so it's leadership and giving them the skills and the tools, and then creating that culture of accountability where you're not, that told me they don't have that culture. They didn't think anything was going to happen to them. And so, those are the first steps, in my opinion, of changing the culture. So we've got to keep talking about it, though. We just have
No
to.
doubt.
And that's where, and you know what, I will tell you that we are better. And this is, you could argue that, well, how can you even say anything in defense of cops? But, these conversations, to be able to say, that, I stand with you when you are right, and I part with you when you are wrong. And as a profession, we have to do that to these police officers that do not deserve to wear our noble and honorable badge.
Right. And I would add, my dad used to say, there's no softer pillow on which to rest your head than that of a clear conscience. And
Retweet.
so, and that wasn't training. That's like Confucius Moyer laying it down, right?
Yeah.
So what are the nibbles, the quick bites that our leaders can really, I think, demonstrate when they listen to this? They go back into the boardroom, the dispatch center, property and evidence, patrol briefing, investigations, wherever they are in the corporate world or in policing. What are the things? You want to start by giving a couple little quickies?
Outline expectations. Here is what I expect of you. And those expectations should be filled with attributes of integrity and human dignity, and just being humane. So first of all, set those expectations, and again, say them loud and say them repeatedly, so that every person in the organization understands. But that's not enough, because those are just words. And then the second part is you hold those people accountable who do not line up with those expectations.
Yes, and we don't have to really discuss our values. We demonstrate them every day. But discussing them and then demonstrating is really powerful. I would add this. Any leader who's listening to this that says, oh my gosh, if this could happen there, it could happen anywhere, explore this. Think about perhaps what it might look like if you started engaging in a practice that encourages breathing to really reset, breathing to between stimulus and response lies choice, our Viktor Frankl quote that you and I talk about a lot. That's really where our freedom lies. Between stimulus and response lies choice. And perhaps just go out into the Google or the World Wide Web and see what you can do, what you could find to really get your folks to have a conversation about, look, it's natural for us to be overcome sometimes. And we can engage in a practice that can help us through that. Each one of us can be the leader, the clear thinker. Rudyard Kipling said something about when others are overcome, I will be the clear and the steady, and I will not be taken away. I will not be washed away by emotions. So perhaps every leader should explore their training, examine their values, demonstrate their values, have the difficult conversations, hold folks accountable, explore training such as meditation and mindfulness as a practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And then bringing it full circle, to our gentleman that was affected, is to also be able to recognize, that people are the walking wounded. People are, we say that hurt people. And so having the courage to be that disruptor and to walk in and to make, if you have to, it might be an uncomfortable situation, but it's a courageous move that people make by asking, are you okay? And then, asking again if they need to. So, I think we can land the plane there. And I think I'll say, if I were standing on a bridge, I would call you. And I don't want to make you not want to. Now, every time I call, you're going to answer the phone because you're going to be freaking out that I'm on a bridge. But it's not hey, like that. I'll text first.
I'll call you because we've had this conversation. You're in my favorites. Just one click. Remember. You're going to be
sitting in the middle of a meeting and you're going to be like, oh shit, Zeman's calling. She's probably on a bridge. And then you'll have to answer. I'll be like, hey girl.
Hey girl. Hey. Hey, you are my favorites. Right on. Preach, sister. So bring us home.
All right. Well, listen, thank you, bunnies, all of you bunnies out there who are listening to us. This was a crunchy episode, and we understand that. But, it can't always be about waffles and peanut butter still. And
should be.
Tramp stamps of our faces.
Beaver tail.
And beaver tail.
Shout out to Michelle Davey.
Shout out to our Canadian crush. So this podcast is produced by Ted Madden, and the song you're about to hear is written and performed exclusively for our little podcast by my handsome and talented son, Jake, who just booked a movie, and his accomplished friends, Fabian and Zoe. If you like the podcast, stop right now and just click subscribe right now. Just do it right now. Hit like, subscribe, and you may be our 1,000,001 listener. And listen, review it. Tell everyone you know about this podcast. If you don't like it, what do you know about podcasts? Just move along.
They know nothing.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
When you look inside, what do you find? Are you content to fall behind? When you lose your way and you've lost your why? Have courage and get ready to fight the hollow buddy. When the way ahead is covered in smoke and you're tired and you're scared and you're losing hope, you'll open your heart and your eyes to see a challenge and a question. Why not me? To fight the hollow buddy. And we all feel hollow sometimes, but the monsters are only in your mind. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're brave and kind, you'll be alright. If you fight the hollow buddy. When the challenge ahead scares you to death, you tame the imposter inside instead. To change the world, you've got to start small. It takes a leader to say, I don't know it all, and I know I'm gonna fall, but I'll pick it up and come back stronger, failing forward and moving onward, doing the hard thing and the right thing, forever fighting the hollow bunny. And we all feel hollow sometimes, but the monsters are only in your mind. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're outside but empty within. Something's gonna crack, you've gotta start again. And we all tough on the outside but empty within. Something's gonna crack, you've gotta start again. The monsters are